So good morning. As you know, my name is, well, for those of you who do know and don't know, my name's Macalie Adamson, and I am currently a social mission and women prisons chaplain. But my being up here, you can probably guess that this has not always been the case. Up until about 8 years ago, I was a daily user of methamphetamine, something that I have had an on-again, off-again relationship with for over 14 years. You may know that I have an adult son who for many years didn't know if his mother was dead or alive. And it was only by dumb luck that I did not end up being in prison, being ministered to by a chaplain rather than being the chaplain. So, my story, like most people who have to live with the disease of addiction, at times have been incredibly painful and very traumatic. And instead of sharing with you my painful past, I decided to invite you in to share my victory, my second act, as you may call it. So come with me, will you, as I decide to truly live. I watched as a young man's heart broke more and more. Today was his 16th birthday, and we had reminded his father for days that Ethan's birthday was approaching. He didn't want much, just for his dad to remember. He didn't. As I watched Ethan's heart break, he lunged for his father, crying out to him that he hated him. We had to break up the flight, and Ethan fled. I removed myself from the situation and I started to search for Ethan. I had not realised this at the time, but Ethan's pain had inspired me, and it was the first real feeling that I'd had in a very, very long time. I ached for him, and I ached for my son. When I found Ethan, I asked him, what if I got clean, got off the drugs, you could come and live with me? I'm pretty sure your father would agree. Ethan is still in jail now, but that day was the first day in a very long time that I knew I needed help. So I made a very important phone call, and I promptly burst into tears. I'd been homeless for over 18 months. I was incapable of managing my own life, and all I could do was get from 1 week to the next so that I could get on again. That's street talk for buy more drugs. I booked an appointment for the next day, and before she hung up, the voice on the line said, "Now, Macalie, when you get to the desk, you're going to meet Hoya. I'm not going to be there, but I want you to tell her that I said you needed a hug. She's going to give you a very big one, okay?" All I could think was, why would someone want to hug a junkie like me? So very shyly the next day, I walked through the doors of Gold Coast Recovery Centre, Pathways. I spoke with Hoya. She even made me a cuppa. She got me settled as I was a little bit early, and after a few minutes, I got the courage to tell her what Catherine said. She came straight over to me and she wrapped me up in the biggest hug. And I'm never going to forget that moment. The love and the compassion that was given to me, a homeless junkie. It is something that inspires me in the tough days, and it will for the rest of my life. It's something that I've brought into my chaplaincy every single day with those who need support from the Salvation Army. But more on that in a moment. You see, I am a very firm believer that all good ministry work starts with either a hello or a very, very big hug. So let's fast forward 9 months. I've now completed the Pathways program twice. At that stage of my life, it was the only thing I'd ever completed, and even though I was still using drugs and I was relapsing often, I was never turned away. I was never told to not do what I was doing. I was always offered a warm cuppa, a Tim Tam, and some connection. It wasn't until I was faced with the cold, hard truth that I could not manage my life without drugs if they were a part of it, that I decided to make a permanent change. So, once again, I made a tear-filled phone call. The Salvo's Pathways team had me in a detox bed within 2 weeks, and I had not been more than a few days sober in more years than I care to remember. By this stage, I had found accommodation, and I was doing the Pathways program for a third time. Life was finally starting to kick back into place. I had new inspiration to maintain my sobriety. I had decided that the Salvos needed to hire me. So I made a promise to myself that they would. The only problem was I was a month clean. I had no formal education, and the only thing that I could add to my resume was a job as an unbelievably bad drug dealer. So, with not much going for me, they suggested that I start my studies, and they helped me enrol in a community services certificate, which I felt woefully ill-equipped to do. But they had a trainer come into the recovery centre and help people from rehab and the Pathways program become employable again. By this time, I'd been in with the Salvo's Money Smart program, which is a free financial and counselling service, and I'd started to learn how to budget, and I was saving a small amount every fortnight. Then disaster hit. I had a disagreement with the landlord that I was renting my room from, and I had 14 days to find somewhere else to live. Overwhelmed and craving drugs, I once again made a phone call. I'd not realised it at the time, but those phone calls being picked up, they were the start to me being able to trust again, and after all those years on the street of being taken advantage of. So after an interview, I was accepted into Stillwater's supported accommodation for women and families experiencing crisis. It was through the staff of the Gold Coast Homeless Service that God showed himself. It was there that my journey truly began. You see, up until that time, I was doing all of this work stubbornly alone. I was deaf to the additional support that was available to me, and I certainly had no idea that the Salvos were indeed a church, nor that I was about to give my heart to God in a few short days. When I arrived, I was given clean bedding, my own room with a fridge, a desk, and a door that I could lock. There was a shared bathroom, and we had the whole top floor. I made my bed as I wept in gratitude. I finally felt safe. In our first resident meeting, I was introduced to the chaplain, Robin. She said a few prayers, and I thought, good for her, all the while feeling bitter and resentful towards a God that I had no comprehension of, except to reluctantly go to church every Easter and Christmas with my ex's parents. But I was open enough to keep coming back, even though she prayed. The following week, I was down with some of the ladies smoking, and they mentioned that they would be going to church tomorrow. I had this picture of like the walls burning down and God laughing at me for me attempting to go into his church, so I laughed at them. They encouraged me to go, and I said, where? They said, the Salvo's church, next door. Come. They're different, they said. They're nice to people like us. Up until that moment, I always thought that the Salvation Army was a charity, not a church. And I remember clearly hearing Major Kevin Holland preach like it was yesterday. Standing up in front of the church, speaking of William and Catherine Booth's Christian mission. William had walked his son, Bramble, into the pub he and his soldiers were doing ministry in. He puts his arm around his son and he says, son, These are our people. I will never forget that moment. And as the tears fell from my eyes, that was the moment that I knew that I was home. I gave my heart to Jesus that day. I gave my heart to a God that I did not know, but I knew me. That was over 7 years ago, and I am proud to say that 2 weeks ago I turned 6 years clean. You see, I still had some growing to do. I had to have a relapse that nearly cost my life, but every step of the way, one part or all parts of Gold Coast Salvation Army have surrounded me. They have loved me, particularly when I couldn't love myself. So it wasn't just one place. It wasn't one part of the Salvation Army, and I don't think that I'd be here today if it was just pathways I could access, or if it was just still waters, or if it was only the church. You see, it was a combination of everyone working together in unity. You see, I was a complex case, as so many of us who need your support are. I was traumatised, I was incapable of asking for help or receiving it, and it wasn't until everyone surrounded me with the mission of William and Catherine Booth to transform one life at a time with the love of Jesus that I can stand here before you today and celebrate a life well lived. So, back to the promise that I made myself the day I left detox. I'd made a promise to one day walk through the doors of Gold Coast Recovery Services with a Salvation Army uniform on. It took me 18 months, but I walked through those doors as a proud volunteer, and after 5 years of pursuing my goal to serve the Army like I promised, I now have the absolute privilege to be a chaplain for the Salvation Army, where my love for God, a deep respect for myself, and a passion to serve others begun. I believe in good. Can you too? Thank you.